Good morning, everyone. My name is Amber Gunst. I am the CEO of Austin Technology Council. This is what happens when you use all of your words by Wednesday morning. So I'm the CEO of Austin Technology Council. We are thrilled to have you join us this morning. We're sure there are going to be a few other people coming on with this as well, but this is a really important conversation. And we changed it up a little bit last minute with the extension for the city and county and the decision to keep everybody working from home through August 18th or August 15th. And so we wanted to have a conversation about culture and communication with companies as we're going through these transitional times. And really excited to have Jennifer Cobb Moynihan with Elevate Communications and Shay Sabhikhi with CognitiveScale to come in and have this conversation and give you a lot more feedback than I can give you, because I only have 2 employees and they have a lot more that they work with. So we do have a Slido that we're using for questions today. The Slido code is 57312. Again, that is 57312. But I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and Shay now, because they are a lot more interesting to listen to than I am. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I want to encourage this to be much more of a conversation and a dialogue. So whether you post in Slido or put your questions in the chat throughout the conversation with Shay, please pipe in and share your insights and questions that you have, because we want this to be a very rich conversation instead of just Shay and I chatting about particular issues. Very quickly, my background is I work with Fortune 10 tech companies across the globe on their communications and on their executive narratives and development. So currently I'm having lots of conversations with my clients about what does it mean to return to work? How do they continue to be over communicating, proactively communicating in a way that still resonates with what's happening in the world? And also taking the time to step back and listen, and what are the crucial conversations that employees, partners, customers need to have with you. And as everything is very fluid, as Amber mentioned, with the governor extending the time, clients and companies have to figure out what does that mean and what does that look like for them, which is why I asked Shay to join me, because he's going to be able to bring in the perspective of the insights and some of the conversations that he's having within his company. So Shay, the first thing I just would love to start off with is, what are some of those conversations that you're having, and how are your teams trying to figure out how to work together, and what are you as a leader looking at and doing?
Yeah, so thank you, Jennifer, and great to be here today. Just a little background. So we are an AI software company based out of Austin, and we serve the Fortune 500, actually more than that, Fortune 1000, I guess, healthcare, financial services, and digital commerce. So it's really about how you use AI to better understand your customers. So look, we have the benefit, I guess, of being a software company. And so, unlike manufacturing and folks where people have to be physically together, we were able to switch very quickly to working remote, right? And, in fact, I would say we were quite proactive in sort of saying, let's move to remote, because, it didn't really impact our business. We immediately instantiated what we call business continuity plans with our customers and our partners and so on. But the dialogue and the conversation has always been around, so how is it really working out, right? And I have to say that, I sort of have two reactions to that. One is, it has been insanely productive, okay? Almost, and I think, Jennifer, you and I were talking about this earlier, almost to a fault where I feel like folks are just going nuts from one Zoom call to another. And it almost where, we are sort of giving proactive guidance to our managers and our team members to say, look, you don't have to be on every Zoom call. The fact that there's a Zoom call doesn't mean you have to show up. Although people tend to have a little bit of this guilt feeling. I'm on a Zoom call, so I should show up. So, that's impacting some things. So while productivity is at a crazy high, I feel like, if there was ever any doubt, and there were doubts, as you all know, right? When someone said, hey, I'm working from home today, you'd be like, yeah, right. What does that mean? Well, look, I think those doubts are just that myth about not being productive in your remote, they've been completely busted, right? I think we've seen almost the other end, where I worry now about the mental aspects, the fact that people can't actually separate work from your social life or your family time, right? And so I think it's that those kinds of conversations that we're having, right? So to answer your question, Jennifer, questions are around the fact, is this sustainable? Okay. The guidelines, unfortunately, coming down from federal to state to city have been very vague, and as we all know. And so we look at this whole sort of return to work in this sort of, I call this sort of the two ways of looking at it. One is, when do we return? Do we have to really hurry it up, given that, we aren't truly impacted? But I'll talk about that in a second in terms of where we're seeing the impact. And then how do you return, right? And the how do you return, because of a lack of guidelines, one of the things we thought about was bring people together and just don't make it a top down, hey, let's go, uh, put certain policies together that help protect people, logistics,
Right.
and all of those things, but get the team to actually come back and hear from other members of the company on where the concerns are, where the anxiety is. Is it about being in the same place with the same population set, or should we start breaking it up by day? Should we start doing some other things and so on? And then how do you integrate people who are remote and working together, working in the office? So those are the conversations that we've begun. But to really address that, I don't want this to be a top down. I think one of the things we've done is establish that committee of people that are cross-functional across the team to give us that guidance.
So one of the conversations I'm having a lot with the companies that I'm working is, and I've coined it, a blended work environment. So having people work remotely and those come into the office, and how do you build a framework around that? I think one of the things that we talked about yesterday in prep for this, you talked about that committee and some of the things that they're highlighting in terms of what's important in terms of communication and how you plan for it. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about, what are some of the insights that they've brought up?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is communication is critical, right? So we keep hearing from the team that, look, in this day and age where you're remote and people show up on Zoom calls or don't show up and so on, you're lacking that personal touch. And so one of the feedback we get is, yes, they love the fact that, there's these Friday stand-ups and virtual happy hours and so on. But I don't think anyone has ever complained, because we do so many of these sessions where we get people in meetings and we've told managers to do, one-on-one communications. I think my mantra through this process is you can't go wrong with over communication. And some of that feedback has been has come to us through these working committees where people said, look, because we don't know and because the guidelines aren't clear, just tell us, even things like putting a not before date out there, where folks are like, look, I know it's summer and most people think, where are you going to go this summer? Well, even if they want to go and work remotely, at least give us some indication of when that potential date might be. So we're looking at a lot of city guidelines and using that feedback. I find that two things, and I'll address this. One is, I feel like the folks that I find that are really struggling are managers, right? People who have been, they walk the hallways, they tap people on the shoulders, they see how things are going, they feel like they have a pulse of the business. And I find that those folks are the ones that are really struggling, because they have to sort of reorient the thing. And these are seasoned managers, right? Folks who have worked in management for, and I call this the second line managers who basically have worked in, in those situations, and they work with remote teams as well. But this is brand new for them, right? In dealing with this and also dealing with the stress people are going through. Learning how to be a lot more empathetic, understanding personal situations. These are the things that we're getting through these committees also is, look, the fact that you can show up at any time when there's a call versus I have young kids, I have older parents, me and my spouse both work. There's noise and other distractions because we happen to be in a smaller space. Not everyone understands those things. So I think one of the things we've done through this also communication also is it's the communication to the company, but also working with the managers. I have a phenomenal head of HR who makes sure to reinforce those points with the managers to say, look, be empathetic and ask people to take time off also if they need to, right? Because folks are going so crazy with these calls and being connected. Take a Friday off, take half day off, add a day perhaps to the weekend, and just get your sort of mental state together. She did quite an amazing thing. She also signed up for something called Better Minds. It's a program where we give counseling sessions to folks that need it. Look, you don't know who needs it. And in fact, there may be visible signs when you see them, but in this, when you're remote, you really don't know how people are reacting to this stuff. So we just open those kinds of things up. But a lot of that has come to us through the channels of communication back. So I would just sort of, just to sort of summarize, I would say over communicate, listen to your teams. And I have one of the things that I probably didn't do enough of is these one-on-one sessions that I've had at skip levels to just get to know how people are doing. Nothing about work, right? Just at a personal level. How are you doing? How are you dealing with this crisis has been invaluable feedback.
Mm-hmm. You've touched on a lot of different things, so I kind of want to break some of that apart. And again, for those that are on the call, if you want to throw any questions in the chat or through Slido on any of the topics that Shay talked about or we cover, please feel free to go ahead and just start throwing those in. I'm going to break those things apart a little bit. First, you talked about the management team, and a lot of the conversations I'm having with leaders and managers is that anxiety and stress of they've lost a bit of touch where they were felt very connected to their team. They felt that in collaborative environment, and oftentimes their teams are still working, things are still happening, but they're not confident that they have a pulse on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the conversations I have are asking them to look back to what's happened over the last 3 months. You know, are projects still moving forward? Are they aware of the most important things? They may not have had a day-to-day walk the hall moment. Hey, how's it going? You know, what's happening? But at the same time, if they are reminded that they do have a sense of where things are moving forward and how things are moving forward, and I think you touched on something important. In the tech industry, the ability to keep projects moving forward is very different than other industries. And so oftentimes managers just need that reminder that they might not have the exact sense, but they do have a strong sense. You know, what are some of the guidance or conversations you're giving to some of these managers that are having to make this switch?
Yeah, look, managers across the board, right? Cross-functionally, you have managers in engineering that work with remote teams, and you know they're struggling a little bit with that. Like I said, you know, that face-to-face interaction and really getting to see. But look, the way you alleviate that is you have that constant sort of one-to-one communication. You know how the product is moving forward. You have we do what's called sort of weekly sessions where I use the term. You know, it's kind of borrowing from the music industry, jam sessions. Okay, so jam sessions to me are one way that we've tried to bring the teams together. We do this at a company level. We do this individually at a department level. Now, look, I'm not a proponent of just adding more Zoom calls, but I do feel like some of these calls, like the jam sessions, have been really important because it gives people the ability to do two things. If it's a departmental jam session, they get a chance to come in, and no different than how they would do it before. They would basically speak to the progress that they've had and essentially talk through all the things that they've done, right? So they feel engaged. At a company level, I think this has been a game changer. And I feel like this has really, really helped us because what it's done is it has brought the company together. You know, so sales, nobody has an indication. So how's sales really going? Sales has been really tough, by the way, through this. As I said, we've become really productive. The one area where I can say that where sales managers are struggling and sales leaders struggling right now is, look, I'm having lots of great conversations, but I don't have that personal interaction with the customer, the sit across the table or have a cocktail, take them out to dinner, where a lot of those relationships get built, right? So that's the piece that's missing a little bit. And, you know, we're learning how to cope with this. And my thing there to those managers is, look, sales cycles will get elongated, okay? What we can do the best at this moment in time is to build the pipeline and have the conversations, because we are going to get over the hill. Once we get over this pandemic, you know, the companies that will thrive will be the ones that have actually invested the time and the effort to build those relationships, even though they may not be the tightest relationships, but you've had the conversations, you've primed the pump. You come out of this crisis, you'll be in a much better spot to then take them forward. So I think that's kind of the guidance we've been giving the team is over communicate, do one-on-ones, invite folks to jams, give them a voice, listen to them, be empathetic, right? So those things. In fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a slide because to me,
yep, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, give me a second here. I'm going to put this up. If I can figure this out. All right, I'm going to share my screen. It's probably best if I do it this way. I actually brought this up at my company all hands not too long back. Let me know if you can see this clearly.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay.
Everybody can see it. Just a quick thumbs up. Great.
Awesome. So here is how I I think of this. Look, this is a McKinsey framework, but if anything, it gives us it gave me a good mental model for how to think through the, kind of the, how should we think about return? And Jennifer, I take a broader view of return. To me, physical return to the office is one element of it, but let me just walk through this, right?
Right.
You look at this sort of how we started way back in sort of mid-March, maybe early March, was stage one, right? So this was the crisis hit, the city shut down. We had to sort of address the immediate challenges, get people to really sort of hunker down, make sure that all business continuity planning with customers, partners, all of that was done. I think any responsible company would do step number one. I think any responsible company would do step number two, which is really, look, take stock of your financials, and every company is at different stages, right? So you have smaller companies, shorter cash runways, larger companies, maybe a bit more profitable and so on. But you got to take stock of where you expect the ball to be, because this crisis, as we knew coming into March, maybe beginning April, was this is not going to be short term. It's going to have an impact. So take stock of that. I think we are done with 1 and 2. And I think, frankly, if I was to just speak for us at CognitiveScale, I think we did a fairly good job of really looking at 1 and 2 and making sure that we had that addressed. To me, where the square focus, I think this is sort of the questions you're bringing up, Jennifer, are around 3 and 4. And let me talk about 3. Because to me, return is more than, there's a physical return to the office, but I think it is a sort of, I look at this as a return to the new normalcy, right? Because things are going to be different. Like I said, selling is going to be different. Managing people is going to be different. How do you sort of evolve, extend culture is going to be different. How do you price products? How do you package them? How do you change the game? Because clients are going to be in the same situation that we are, which is they're not spending money. So how do you prime them up to be able to go to that point, right? So to me, return has that broader piece, not just the return to the office, but certainly return to the workplace is an important part because of the mental stress and the anxiety some of the folks in the company face, right? So I think where we are today is really looking at 3, but starting to look at 4, because to me, this is where, if we're not careful, if you look at this and say, look, we truly believe that every large enterprise is going to want to, transform itself with digital and AI. And if we want to come out of this crisis and be well positioned, how do we reimagine that next normal, the new normal, but sort of how this is going to shape up for our clients in terms of what they buy? Where are cost pressures going to come in? Where does value come in? How do we position ourselves best? So I look at us as really in the 3 and 4 stages of this framework. I think 5 will happen. And I think 5 is definitely one that we need to be paying attention to a bit longer term. But sort of the immediate term, I'd say the next 6 to 9 months need to be squarely around 3 and 4. And that's kind of where we are. But anyway, I thought I'd share this because to me, this was a really good mental framework for me, but also an operating model for us at the company to really execute.
I think it's a great model. I'm familiar with it along with a few others. I'm going to share the flip side of this in terms of how do you think about the communication pieces in a little bit. One of the things that I think you hit on that I think is super important is that idea of physical. It's not just physical return to the office. It's the emotional, the psychological, the physiological, all of the pieces of whether you're in office, but how do you think about continuing to have the right collaboration model? What is the mental health aspects? Because you have plenty of individuals who want to get back into the office. They need that separation of space because whether it's where they are, where they're located, or their family dynamic, they, like, as you mentioned before, they don't have that break. And how do you think about the emotional and the physiological? Like, how are people continuing to exercise and stay healthy? Everyone's talking about the COVID-19 pounds and, all of that has an effect on how people work. I think one of the things that you mentioned in terms of productivity is, as you're thinking about number 4 and what it looks like to go in and reimagine, what are the things that you think are super critical in terms of that emotional aspect and, how the employees need to think about what that reimagining is?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few of those, but I'll just sort of reiterate a few things, right? Like I said, there's this guilt around I have to be on every call. You don't have to be on every call.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Right.
And I feel like this weighs on people. And even the fact that, so if I'm going to tell my manager now that I'm going to take time off, the first reaction I think is going to be, what are you going to do? You're not going out anywhere. So, you might as well be on. And I think that's just a wrong, I mean, it's just a wrong thought process. That's some of the things that we're trying to reinforce with the teams, is to say, look, it's so hard, the mental aspects, even pre-COVID. Just think about it, this pandemic never happened. The stress that people go through, that was bad enough, and things would go, unnoticed and so on. And look, we've had situations at the company as well, but I'd say now even more so because of stress. And it's the personal side, it's the work side, it's the anxiety around jobs and the future and everything that we hear around us, in terms of spikes and the second wave and all of those things. I think this is weighing in on people, and you can't take that lightly. And hence, when Kendall in our company, she started the this whole sort of better minds thing and offering counseling. To me, this is stuff that we want to reinforce, make use of it. Even speaking to someone outside of a work setting, we invited, to the extent that it's actually helped folks at the company, even getting an outside in perspective. So we brought in investors, we brought in board members. I brought in an advisor. In fact, we just had a call this morning with one of our advisors who happens to be was one of the leading people at IBM, who spoke to the company, and he compared and contrasted this with 9/11 and .com and 2008, and he said, look, these are crises, these are not structural crisis. This is not a structural crisis, this is a point in time crisis. It will pass, but foundationally nothing's changed. There will be some big changes that will come in terms of how people buy, but you're well positioned to do that. I think hearing that outside in perspective also is really important. So those are the types of things that we've been reinforcing at the company quite a bit as well.
The mental health side of it, one of the things that I'm encouraging all of my clients to do is, there are a ton of different apps that are available through the various app stores. There's Mindspace, there's a bunch of different ones where that, everyone should take advantage of that opportunity to kind of reset themselves and figure out what works for them, whether it's taking a walk outside for a half hour, or, if you don't feel comfortable or you don't really have a place where you can go to do that kind of thing, or here when it's 100 degrees and we don't feel like going outside, even just going to a spot and getting off of your phone, or using one of the apps or something, just to break up how you think about it in terms of refreshing and recharging, is absolutely critical to that reimagining, to how do you think about the next day, the next month, the next week. All of that becomes very important. One of the other things that we had talked about in preparation, and I want to kind of go back to the jam session because I think it's super important, when you were talking about it at the company level, one of the comments you made to me was one of the greatest values is everybody across the company feels like they have at least some sense of what's going on, and that sense of isolation across individual teams doesn't exist anymore. And in that jam session, there's an opportunity, because it's sales driven and engineering driven, and all of the pieces kind of come together. I'd be curious for you to share a little bit about how you foresee that in the future, and what does that look like going forward?
Yeah, look, firstly, the jam session was not our idea, but it was one that we borrowed and stole, with credit to one of our customers, actually, because they ran this really effectively with a team of about 100 people, partners, everyone coming together. And within an hour, everyone was forced into a format where you had about 7 minutes to present a slide, but show something. And you had a chance across the entire group of about 100 people to see what was really happening and how the pieces were fitting together. I loved that format. And so we borrowed that format and we brought that into the company. And it's one that has, so look, we're about maybe 2 months into these jam sessions, 2 or 3 months. We've gotten some really good feedback, which is that, hey, I'm in engineering. I don't know what's happening in sales. How are the deals going? What features of my product are really being used? How can I contribute to a sales cycle? And while some of this stuff is already happening, sort of implicitly behind the scenes, to make it a bit more explicit and get people a lot more connected, I think has been a game changer. Now, logistically, if you think about it, it's hard to do when you're physically in the office, because to get the entire company together. Imagine, setting up the chairs, getting this becomes a lot more formal. But with Zoom and the way we've set it up now, it's become a lot easier. And I think to answer your question, Jennifer, this is a format that I don't think goes away. Frankly, I look at this as an important part of how we operate now. In the future, depending on how this shapes up in terms of return to work, I think we have to be very accommodating in terms of, you mentioned blended. To me, there will still be folks who are very cautious. And I don't want to sort of enforce, even when a day and a date comes in and say, got to get back to work. You got to be mindful of their personal situations and then say, look, rather than ostracize you because you're not in work, we know that this is a tough environment. Let's make sure that you feel blended into the work culture. And I think this whole process of using Zoom, along with folks that are physically there, running more of these jam sessions, getting people more integrated, to me has been one of the eye-opening things for me. And I see this continuing for the company going forward.
Yeah. I can see where a lot of companies could adopt that, whether you're big or small. Just the idea of whether it's Zoom or, the blended office plus remote becomes a very important way for people to stay connected across the team.
And I'm also I'm also about to shamelessly borrow one more idea from this just came up recently. In fact, someone sent this out saying there's this thing called fabulous bragging sessions. Okay. You look this up. It's actually Roger Millikan's approach towards how he runs his company and he brings people together. It's where, and there's some guidelines and rules around how people come present, but it's not just sales and marketing and engineering. It's also finance and G&A and other aspects, other departments within the company that don't get a voice normally, but they're doing some amazing things at the company. They get a 5-minute pitch to come and really talk about themes like, I'm cost cutting. Look at the things I've done around expense management or efficiency and productivity and so on. Things that you don't look at, you always look at top line sales, right? Or product. So I think, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to mention those are some in the spirit of borrowing ideas, I want to bring in as much of this as we can into the company and see if we can, get better at these things.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important, and it's sharing and stealing, but it's really sharing. It's not so much stealing, it's sharing. It's the idea of audaciously brag about teams and the work that is happening, and not so much that it's just the bragging and acknowledging them, but it's to enable other people on other teams to take those ideas and build on them and make them better. I think that's one of the things that is critically important about the jam session and the opportunity to take those ideas and teams figuring out what's working for them and then broadly sharing it so that others can steal it. One of the things that you and I talked a little bit about was how you're sharing across with other leaders, things like opportunities like this and other CEO sessions or other conversations you're having, and you're sharing what's working and listening to what other people are seeing. I think that's an important aspect as well, is actually taking advantage of how other companies are doing it and looking at how you can either adapt or adopt models that you think will work within your company.
Yeah, we are lucky in that sense. We have a really good set of investors, so Microsoft, Intel, and they invite me often to these forums where they bring in other portfolio CEOs, and these are similar sort of companies, right? I'd say growth stage type companies that are enterprise software and other industries. So you get a chance to see and hear a really good set of from executives, founders, on how they're dealing with the crisis, what's worked, what's not worked. Even getting a sense of comfort when you say, look, sales for me have slowed down a little bit here, but I'm hearing this from a lot of the other folks, but invest in pipeline. So you're getting a lot of those messages reinforced, and some really good ideas have come out of that as well. I think I was mentioning this to you earlier. This founder who basically ships bottles of bourbon over to their customers because they said, look, I can't meet my customer. I have a relationship with them. I'm going to ship them bourbon. Okay. And I'm going to have a call with them. And it's not going to be a work call. It's going to be a social call. The social call is going to be about sipping bourbon while we sit across Zoom, just talking about stuff. Now, I don't know how successful that'll be, but it's intriguing, right? I think there's lots of creative things that have come out of my conversations with other CEOs that's been useful to me.
Yeah. So that's one of the biggest things that I think people can take away is this pandemic has actually shifted some of the willingness to be open, even, across competitors or partners, because if you don't, there's missed opportunities. You may find someone who might have been a competitor who's shifted their business model, or you're going to shift your business model, and it might change the dynamic that you have. For example, one of the areas that I have found super interesting recently in a couple conversations that I've had is real estate development companies, clients that are in the process of either working on AI technologies for example, energy efficiency, or some of the other things, are now completely shifting those projects and getting more into how do we build safer environments. They're willing to look at how do you shift from energy efficiency being the focus, for example, to how do we build buildings, or how do we retrofit, or how do we manage our buildings in terms of the technologies we use and the things that we're looking at in terms of filtration systems and all these things. So I think there, as you mentioned, whether it's you send over bourbon or coffee for a chat, the idea is you can learn from your customers how their mindset has changed. They projects that you're working on may be very different than what you thought you were working on before.
Yeah, that's why, one of the other things I tell the team is, and we hear this also reinforced by some of the advisors I spoke with, is listen to your customers, because the way they're thinking through some things, you can always go in with the same model of selling and same products and same pricing, and you got to purchase my software in this manner may not fly anymore, because, the analogy that was given to me, in fact, just today was, if you're going from Austin to New York, would you want to sell them the entire trip, which in this day and age would be, wow, that's pretty expensive. And, maybe I'm not ready, right? But if you said, look, I'm going to sell you from Austin to Dallas, and I'll send you Dallas to Memphis, right? You're starting to break this up into chunks where they can consume this better, see the value, and then be able to, you'll eventually get to New York, but you'll have to do this incrementally. Now, how do you do that? You listen to your customers, you understand the objections, you understand their budgeting cycles, because they're all going through exactly the same things that we are, which is, I'm spending, budgets are frozen, I'm spending money on the most important things. So I think this other thing around, of course, communicate, but listen to your customers and adapt, be nimble. And there's a bad word in the software industry, at least in startups, it's pivot. Well, pivot's not so bad, because you're adapting. You're adapting to where the market is. You're adapting to where the customer's needs are, right? So.
Yeah. And I think there's opportunities to take what you're hearing from your customers and even listen more broadly than you might have within your employees, because great ideas can come from anywhere. Oh, yes. And that's something that this is an opportunity where, individuals who are productive at home, they have a sense of autonomy, and as you mentioned, they're thriving. This may give them an opportunity to bring up some things that, because they're operating in a different fashion and looking at things differently, right, how they can serve and how you can serve your customers differently.
And to do that, you need time. So this thing of, Zoom session to Zoom session to Zoom session, and you end your day and you're like, I have actually gotten zero thinking time. And it's all been sort of this back-to-back meeting stuff. Look, I'm not just calling out the Zoom sessions, but in general, what I'm saying is, I think part of this also has to be thinking time outside of all these meetings where you say, look, I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to just basically bring thoughts and ideas together. And I think that needs to be done a lot more. It goes back to the conversation we were having earlier around sort of the mental state of people and, making sure we don't drive people crazy.
Right. And people, since this topic is about returning to the office, that whole idea of returning to a way for people to have that downtime, and a lot of times that downtime might have been their commute time. Yes. Or it may have been, another piece of time is consciously saying, okay, we're going to build in what was commute time to the downtime, to the, here's the mental break, so that people have the opportunity to ideate and think about things. I mean, I really think that really touches on something else that is important that we haven't talked a lot about, is the whole concept of culture. And I think, that's something that people, leaders are struggling with as well, is how do they have continuity within their culture, whether they're having to downsize or they're growing or they're remaining the same, but having to change things up. And it would be great to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about it and how CognitiveScale has been approaching that.
Yeah, I think this is it's a really important topic, and I think one that, as we discussed earlier, it's you're not going to suddenly out of this establish your culture. It's a living, breathing thing. It evolves, but you're certainly going to reinforce and extend it, right? And I think those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do a lot more of, which is stick to your core principles and values, making sure that those things, crisis or no crisis, in fact, in some cases through the crisis, they get amplified a lot more in terms of how you behave, how transparent are you, how straight up are you with people in terms of what's going on, the actions you take and so on. Look, all of this has to be, it has to take what you've established as culture, but then you've got to sort of extend it and take this new normal and figure out how do you reinforce that in a fairly difficult environment, right? Where some difficult decisions are being made by companies every day in terms of how they operate and so on. So it's not one that I can, truly say, and I'd love to get your thoughts as well, that we've nailed it, right? Because I think we're still learning through the process. And I think part of what I'm trying to do is, number one is, like I said to you, communicate. In some cases, more all hands sessions, Friday stand-ups, virtual meetings, listening to people. I think I have now done about maybe a third of the company one-on-one conversations where I try to just listen to folks and get their perspectives, work-related, personal life-related, and find ways to help. And then I use that to go back to managers to reinforce some of those messages. Look, I don't expect that I'll hear the nitty-gritty, the gory details from the employees that I speak with. Sometimes I may just get, the high level, but I try to make it very personal, the conversations, right? And I think that really helps, because I think I've gotten some feedback from the people I've spoken to say, I really appreciated the 30 minutes you took to talk to me. It was just wonderful because I could just open up. Normally I talk to my manager, but this is just sort of it's those little things, Jennifer. I feel like those things matter so much at this moment in time. And so reinforcing that with the leadership team as well to do more of that. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do more of. But yeah, I'd love to get thoughts from you, since you've been in this space around communication and everything else. Would love to see if there's some ideas I can quote unquote steal from you.
Oh, you can take and share and borrow and use at will. I'll put it's use at will. Well, I think there's a couple things that are super important. The first is, and these are conversations I'm even having with entrepreneurs of very early stage startups. They have 5 people. They haven't really, they don't have a well-established culture. One of the first things that we talk about is, are your values and principles very clearly understood, whether you have 5 employees or you have 500 employees or you have 120,000 employees? It's, does everyone understand the values and principles? Because that's not about a physical location, that's about a common understanding, and that becomes super important. The second piece is to change philosophically how you think about your company culture, and whether you're hiring people or changing, how you approach work. It's all about how do you extend your culture versus do I have culture fit? Because it really is going to be, as you said, culture is a living, breathing thing. It's people understand and have a belief in the same values and principles. It becomes very easy to extend the culture. And as a leader, having those personal conversations as you described, and showing up and being genuine and being transparent, and also having a willingness to be vulnerable to say, I don't know either.
I don't know either.
Yeah. I don't know either. We don't know. Yeah. And you gain far more credibility with your teams, your people as a leader, if you're willing to be vulnerable and say, at this moment in time, here's what I do know and here's what I don't know. Like, that's one of the most important things that you can do. And I'll quickly, before we turn over to Q&A, let's see if now I can be successful in sharing my screen. Let's see if I can get this to share. So I've been using this quite a bit. Hopefully I can get a thumbs up that everybody can see it.
Yep.
Full screen, great.
So switch to your slideshow mode, but I can still see it.
Oh, did it? Oh, it went to slideshow mode. Oh, because it's on my second screen. So let's just see, we'll just fix that. How about that? Everybody can see it now? Full mode?
I'm still seeing.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll do it this way. Let's see if I can just make it bigger for
Yeah,
everybody.
this is fine. This is good.
Yeah, we'll just go this way. It'll be easier. It's a little heavy on the text, but it's basically broken down into 2 sections. So similar to the McKinsey approach, I've taken things from HBR, Bain and Company, Stanford University, research studies, and then from my own experience, how do you think about what the conversation cycles should be? And so just like you stated in terms of starting early and having to go into crisis mode, there's, how do you resiliently fortify your communications, your team, and your business? And so what are some of the things that you need to do and recognize, and we've talked about this a little bit, recognizing your teams and your people most often have the time, the motivation, and the capability. They want to be successful. And so they're going to continue to be and do the things that will make the business continue to move forward. As a leader, there are things you can do in terms of the conversations that you have. As you and I talked about, what's working well, what isn't, having those open dialogues. How do you think we can protect the team, the people side of it? What do we need to do to protect the business? What do we need to do to protect our customers, for example? In the second pillar, that's the notion is, are you trusting and empowering your team because you believe that they have the motivation and the drive to be successful? Are you letting them thrive in the environment as best they possibly can? How do you continue to let them deliver and take some of the control, because there is, in this crisis mode, there's some need to let them take control because they're seeing things that you may not be seeing, and you have to have that trust that they're going to make the best decisions for the common good. So there's things you can ask questions, and in your conversations, what are the few critical things that we can't lose sight of? If your core values and your principles are strong, this is something that they'll reflect back to you and say, here are the things I think we need to be working on, or here are the things that we have at risk. The third one is, adapt boldly, but be balanced. And so the idea is you've got to get ahead of the circumstances as much as you possibly can. You talked about putting together that cross-functional team. There are things that you can do and pull from a diverse set of resources, and also being willing to acknowledge that everyone is stressed. And as a leader, the level of stress you have is different and maybe greater than what individuals on your team have, in some ways, and in some ways not. Just making sure you're taking the time for yourself to be creative, to think, to allow yourself to recharge. And, there's some of these things that, in terms of the business aspect and the questions, like, what are the biggest changes we can make right now? And what do we need to do to make those changes that don't add more stress to the teams, to the organization? Those are the kinds of conversations you can have. And then finally, genuinely engage as a leader, be willing to be vulnerable and authentic. And they're looking to you to be human. At the same time, they're looking to you to be visionary. And there's, questions like, what's on your mind right now? What feels most important? Do you have what you need? A lot of it is about, like you said, being curious about what you need, but not necessarily going into it saying, I have to solve all these issues, because oftentimes you can't. And that's where that transparency and willingness to be vulnerable, to say, I hear you, I'm listening, I don't have the answers, but I do understand that over time, these are things we're going to have to solve for. That will also lessen your personal stress, because the reality is, the more you take on trying to solve each individual's stresses or challenges or issues, the more tiring and the difficult it is for you to actually lift everyone up in the boat and have a broader view of what's happening. It's the listening and taking that in the context of, I'm listening and trying to understand the needs across teams, and how do I think about that? And then taking that to, if you have a cross-functional group, V team that can help you solve those things, or just having those outside conversations with other individuals to see how they're taking opportunities to address it. And I will happily share this with anyone
This is
who's
great. Yeah,
interested in getting it.
it's a really well thought through framework, Jennifer. I'd love to get my hands on this in the spirit of sharing and borrowing.
Yes.
Because these are the types of things, especially from a communication standpoint, like I said, over communicate. But, I see one thing here that I feel like we don't do enough of, especially in the last 3 months, is the recognition aspect. Yes, people show up. Yes, we get folks to present and get engaged, but recognizing folks as they deliver things even incrementally is definitely important. So yeah, I like the framework a lot.
I will send it your way. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we're going to open it up to questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. Amber mentioned that there's one question in Slido, so we'll start with that. And then please don't be shy. One of the most important things for both Shay and I is we want to learn from you. So even if you have suggestions of things you're doing that you think have helped your organization, just like Shay and I are sharing, we would love to hear from you.
Great. So we have a really good question in Slido. Are you seeing an uptick in managers asking about how to handle equality and diversity amongst team members, with the highlight on this in the world more today?
Jennifer, do you want me to?
Shay, you want to take that start? Yeah, go ahead, take that.
Yes, actually we are. In fact, let me put it this way. We've had those conversations prior. We have something at this company that is now being resurrected. It's called Change Salon. Okay. This is an open forum for people to bring forward the burning topic of the day without any management involved, grounds up for people to discuss these things. And one of the things that has been now brought up as an important Change Salon topic is all the stuff that's happening around us right now with discrimination and bias and racial tensions and so on. Now and we've been very open. In fact, when in the last sort of not to get too caught up in the details, but through Juneteenth and even prior to that, we've been very vocal with the company in sort of expressing our point of view and not staying silent, and making sure that the company understands where the team stands with regards to any form of discrimination. But I think the Change Salon to me is my way of giving the folks a platform and a forum to really speak about some of these issues. So what happens with the Change Salon is folks talk about it. It gets moderated by someone who's not a manager. The feedback from that Change Salon, anonymous, is it sort of gets summarized to the management team and the leadership team, and then the leadership team has to respond back. So there's some critical issues that are not being addressed in the company. We hear this, but we hear this in an anonymized manner, and then we can take action, and then that feedback goes back to the Change Salon. So it's become a really good way for us to reinforce this. Now, we had stopped this through this process over the last 3 to 4 months, but we're now reinstating the Change Salon, and the first topic on that is really this topic around discrimination and bias in the workforce.
So I'm going to just add very quickly, because there's some other questions coming in. 2 things that I do with my clients in particular. We have conversations around, if they're growing and hiring, creating and ensuring and demanding that they have diversity slates, so that the candidates that are coming through are diversity, and it may not just be gender or ethnicity, it's thoughts, style, approach, personality, that being mindful of creating a diverse slate. There's a lot of challenge oftentimes perceived with doing that, but if you make the commitment and your recruiting team and your managing and hiring teams know that that is a core principle, it does change that dynamic. One of the things that I often advise is, don't look at just creating a slate job by job, but if you have 3 or 4 jobs that are similar in nature, for example, across engineering principles or several dev jobs, look at creating a single slate. So you might have 10 or 12 individuals for 4 roles. That your ability to attract and recruit is an important part of that. The second piece that oftentimes we talk about in terms of managers, back to the specific question about manager topics, we talk about what is your natural tendency to give stretch roles, stretch projects, the difficult things? Do you always go to the same people, or are you mindful of spreading those things out across your team? Because your opportunity to attract and retain individuals across the entire team, whether they're classified as a diverse individual or not, is going to change overall if you're making it a point to think about, do I always rely on the same person because they're my go-to, or am I actually giving other individuals across my team the opportunity to prove to me what they're capable of? And so that's one of the other aspects of it that I find important. Amber, are you going to go through the questions? Because I see we
so
have
we've
one.
got a great question from Yulia. How do you teach your, which I would have loved to have known this back when I started my sales career over 20 years ago. How do you teach your customers to be more active in communication and reaction? Because this isn't even just a COVID thing. This is just a, how do you get this to happen thing?
Yeah, I mean, my my customers are very proactive, at least in reaching out when there's issues, right? I think one of the things, and I don't know if this works for all, but it has worked for us, is we have a few customers, but we have very deep relationships with those customers. We're not a volume play, right? Thousands of customers, any such thing. But what we do pride ourselves on is taking a customer through a journey, which means that relationship with the customer and getting real-time feedback is insanely important, right? So no hiccups along the way. Customer is the most important thing, and we've got to make sure that they see the value and they expand. So what we do as almost as a part of our process is we do our, in some instances, this is like literally, so it kind of goes daily touch points at a certain level to weekly sync ups at the next level to I do monthly, what we call executive stakeholder meetings where we get feedback from clients. And these can be brutal meetings because this is where we say, look, tell us how we're doing. And you score us on, on a grading to tell us across these different dimensions how we're doing. Because that feedback then gives us the way, a mechanism to go fix this. Because we don't want to reach the point where you're now 6 months, 9 months into it and the customer's like, I'm not happy, but we got no signals along the way. So we want to make it a lot more, interactive with the customer. The best way that I see this happening, in fact, that's what I was saying, it hasn't changed through COVID, is we do Zoom calls. What's changed is I'd love to be physically across a stakeholder and, get a sense for how things are going. We now do it over Zoom. We do it for almost every one of our customers. We do it as frequently as a month. In some cases, ends up being once a quarter. But basically, we use that as a mechanism to get feedback. So I don't know if that addressed your question, Julia, but that's how we're trying to get our customers to be a lot more, forthcoming and reactive as opposed to let's wait and see what happens down the road. I meant proactive than being reactive.
The one thing I would add is I always ask, well, what questions are you asking? Are you asking yes, no questions? Are you asking questions that enable them to open up the dialogue? I think one of the most powerful things that companies can do with their customers, and I do a lot with my clients, is I simply ask why. Why are you feeling that way? Why do you want to take that path so I can better understand how to help you? Just merely opening it up to the why question helps them feel like they can communicate and be better communicators. And oftentimes you have to be willing to go down the path of asking a few whys to understand more about it. But that is something that I have found critically important.
Yeah. And I'll add just one comment to that, Jennifer, which is I think that why aspect that you brought up is so critical, whether it's communication with the customer or your team. We talked about earlier certain decisions that are made around why we're doing this versus this. The why, it's not the, hey, we're going to go do this. If you don't explain the why, you will lose people very quickly because, they may not fully appreciate why, the reasons why it's being done because you have a different perspective as you're looking at things broader than just working on product, right? So
yes.
The why is incredibly important part of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I completely agree. That's something that in terms of whether it's employees, partners, clients, even investors,
yes,
talking about the why aspect, you're going to be much more persuasive and much more believable, and you're going to have more people align with you. Do we have any other questions, Amber?
Well, I actually want to expand on something a little bit. You both talked about the Zoom fatigue. You didn't really use Zoom fatigue, but that's what I talk to people about on a frequent basis. And that, leaders and companies, they try to make sure that their employees aren't getting worn out. But Shay, you mentioned that, you're going from one thing after another. Jennifer, you mentioned, hey, you used to have this commute home and that was your downtime. And so people just don't have that right now. Because my commute home is leaving my kitchen table and going into my kitchen behind me. And so, one of the things that I did, which is, this is a sharing thing, is that I've always told my employees, like, make a 2-hour time block for yourself every single day that you don't schedule anything in. And we've gotten, all three of us have gotten really bad at that. And I am the most guilty person of it right now, that's scheduling stuff into that 2-hour time block. But my big suggestion, and what's always helped me, is just protecting 2 hours of my day where I'm not scheduling phone calls, I'm not scheduling Zoom meetings, I'm not scheduling anything, because that's my time to get caught up. Sometimes I'll take a walk around Town Lake Trail to do that thinking time that Shay was talking about. So if you're struggling with feeling like you're getting started at 7:30 in the morning and you're ending at 8 o'clock at night, like, take that 2 hours at some point in the day and just say, I'm not scheduling anything during this, because that's super important. I actually, yesterday I decided to take my 2 hours and I read a chapter in a book that, is about culture and dealing with Asia and everything else. And so it's, it's business, it's learning, it's thinking, but it's also, it's taking a little break, and it's getting away from the phone and it's getting away from the computer.
Yeah. I think the big thing.
Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead. I was just going to say very quickly, whether it's 2 hours in the day or shutting down at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and whatever it is, that mechanism, I think is super important just to stick to it, particularly as a leader and as a manager. You're setting the tone. So if you're going to enable people to have that mind space, you have to practice it.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that, I'll tell you, right? So yes, on one side I say we're jumping from Zoom call to Zoom call, but I'm doing exactly the same thing. And part of this is just the activity level and the conversations we're having. The barriers are gone, right? So I was telling someone the other day, I'm having more customer conversations in a given week than I've had in a month when you were sort of pre-COVID. Because think of this, right? Previously, it was like, I have to have this meeting, but it has to be in person. So now the logistics and the travel, all of that is gone. So now you have these meetings, and they're productive meetings. They're not face-to-face, but they're still progressing the conversation forward, but they're Zoom calls now. And so your day gets completely backed up. So I'm guilty of that. I need to do a much better job of, practicing what I'm telling my folks to do.
Right. Which is why I always say, and I do it because I have to practice what I preach as a communications coach. I literally shut off at 6 o'clock. Like, I'm done. Like, yes, I check my mail and my messages, at night just to make sure. But in the large scheme of things, I literally just say I'm done. Because if I don't, then I would be on till midnight. There's another question that came in that I just want to be responsive to and respectful to. No, actually, it was one before that about culture and layoffs.
I see it this now.
Just very quickly, I'll touch on this one. Your culture is going to stand if your value and your principles are very clearly laid out. If your principles and your values are, we will fire no one, or we will never let anyone go, then you're going to have a hard time. If you're open and transparent about the difficult decisions that you're having to make, and that they're not decisions based on the company failing, that's something that Shay mentioned. This isn't about the company failure. Unless, unlike other companies, that they have been in trouble and this just exacerbated it, then you need to be transparent about that reality. It is saying we've had to make some really difficult decisions, but we had to focus on how do we maintain and help the business survive until there is the opportunity to go back into a growth mode, and having a vision or a plan for that. Not set in stone with hard times, as Shay described, but being practical to say, there are some steps we're taking. This was one of the most difficult steps, and acknowledging that outside forces have helped or hindered the company, and recognizing that in a very open way. We're at time. I don't know if we want to take one last question or not.
If everybody's good for hanging on for a few more minutes, it looks like from Kevin, it's a really great question and some good information here. So Kevin was asking questions about, and I'm going to paraphrase to keep this. So customer communication activeness position. You know what, can we unmute Kevin and have him ask this directly? Because I think we're going to get a little bit more better of a conversation. Jessica, can you unmute Kevin? I don't want to butcher this. Kevin, go ahead.
Hi there. It wasn't as much a question, it was more of a response to the question about being active with customer communication. And, you know, as a chief customer officer for our company, I mean, I often challenge our customers from a strategy is to say, with digital transformation now being accelerated, and there was data that said that, you know, transformation has happened in 8 weeks, what took 10 years to get to this point, right? And a lot of companies, big or small, aren't handling it very well. And so you're not alone. And it's, you know, just going back to basics of saying, when is the last time that you were, you listened in on customer calls? When's the last time you read chat sessions? When's the last time you had conversations with your frontline associates who are talking to those customers to get the feedback? Because a lot of companies have to go back and actually treat this as disaster recovery. It's that important to say that, what is your plan? And big brands now have hold times over an hour, sometimes 2 hours. Their chat sessions are breaking down, like they can't actually get to everything. And so now is an opportunity where customers just want to be heard. They want you to listen. And so in order for you to be proactive, you need to get that frontline data, right? There's a lot of you can look at empirical analytical data, but you're going to get to the raw data by just spending the time and talking to your team members, talking to your customers, listening to your customers, and saying, like, we got a problem here. So how are we going to fix this? Because this isn't going away. Customer buying patterns have shifted, customer thought patterns have shifted. And if you're not ready to address that, right, you have to come up with a plan. The best plan is start with the customer and work your way backwards.
That is
exactly
so well said, Kevin. And just to sort of reinforce that point, right, I make this point of the company as well. There's no better customer than your existing customer, right? You have the relationship, you're in there, you've got to be listening to them. You've got to, and like we're going through tough times, they're going through tough times, and sticking with them, listening to them and getting them through that process will pay off in a big way for both of us, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of this, because they'll see you as a valued, more than a vendor, a partner through the process. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Right.
They'll be an advocate for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. Well, Shay and Jennifer, this was great. I mean, we had a preview of this on Monday, and I probably could have sat there and listened to the two of you chat for half a day. So this has been really fantastic. There's a lot of great information here. We're going to get the recording out to everybody. We're going to borrow the slides that Shay and Jennifer both shared and get those out to you as well. We look forward to seeing you all very soon again at our next program. Hopefully not too far in the distant future, seeing you in person again. If you have any questions or there's anything ATC can help you with, please reach out to our team at info@austintechnologycouncil.org. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.